Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, we're going to get started here. I know when you have a bunch of poets and writers in a room, they just want to stand around and talk the whole time as opposed to get on with the event. So this is my job. I am the Adult Programming Coordinator for Peter White Public Library. My name is Marty, and welcome to Peter White Public Library. I'm just going to make you aware of a few things that are upcoming this week and next week, and I'm going to turn down my phone. So tomorrow night we have our Northwards in Music. It's our fall Northwards in Music with B.G. Bradley, our in-house band, Big Lake Acoustic with Linda Smith and Seamus Collins. Brian Wallen is going to be our special musical guest that night. And, of course, we have our normal actors. Jackie Love is going to be here. And also Jim Edwards from the Children's Museum. And B.G. Bradley and myself. So I encourage you to come tomorrow night, 6:30. Thursday night, we have an alumni reading of alumni from NMU's MFA program, and that's going to be happening upstairs in the Shiras room at 6:30. On Friday, for those of you that like Night of the Living Dead, this looks like a crowd that would get into that. We are doing a documentary called The Making of the Night of the Living Dead as part of our docu-cinema series, and that starts at 12 noon right here. And for those of you with squeamish stomachs, it's not that bad. So come on, see that. And then I'll just highlight one thing next week. We have our Friendraiser event on Tuesday night starting at 6 p.m., and that's Dan Readimg, who is a cinephile and historian, local historian. Many of you probably knew his father, Fred Readimg, and he's going to be talking about Otto Preminger in Marquette. He's calling the talk Preminger Directs Marquette, and it's in celebration of Preminger's 120th birthday. This year. So it's going to be really fantastic. That is a ticketed event. It's a Friendraiser. Tickets are fairly cheap. They're $5 each, but you do have to go up to the circulation desk and get them. And I encourage you, if you're planning on coming, to go and get them soon. There's quite a few left right now, but my guess is as we get closer to the event, those tickets will be going pretty fast. So that's what we got going here, and I'm just going to, I know that Tom doesn't like long introductions because he feels like he's being eulogized, so I'm not going to do that for you. I'll just say that Tom Lynch has published, this is just astounding to me, 6 collections of poems, 6 books of essays, a book of short stories, and now he's got his first novel out, No Prisoners. That's all I'm going to say, Tom. There we go. Please give a big Peter White Public Library welcome to Tom Lynch.
It's not the eulogizing, it's the obituarial tone of those things that puts me in mind of trouble. So, can you hear me? Am I close enough to the microphone there? Yeah. All right. Thank you. I thought I would, and thanks to John Smollins for the invitation again to come up to the Peter White, because it's, I think I've been here a couple times, and it just, yeah, have I been? Yeah. The drive was familiar. I said, I stopped there once on a sunny day in October, and there I am again. It's like deja vu all over again, so I really appreciate it. And Ellen and I were talking about art history in the moments before this came, and it put me in mind of this poem I'd like to read, because the only course I ever took in art history was most valuable to me, because I learned, I have very sort of, I'm not visually alert, and so art to me is always startling and amazing to me. I can stand for hours in front of a canvas, and I don't know what it means. I don't care. It's so amazing to me. But the one word I learned was ekphrasis, which is a word for a description of an object of art or a piece of art, something you see visually and you try to describe in words. And that's a $3 word where I come from, ekphrasis, you know. And there was a time among literary sorts when they really wanted to write ekphrastic poems, and I thought, I can do that. So I first wrote a poem I have a young assistant that I hired years ago for a variety of reasons. Mostly, I figured she would travel with me to, if I dropped dead in Europe, she could send me back. She knows every undertaker in the English-speaking world because I introduced them to her, so that she'll know if I drop dead, you call this guy in this city, this guy in that city, this woman in Dublin. And anyway, I wrote a poem. She came running in the house one late September after pulling up all the basil, I think they say now. I call it basil. Is basil okay? Okay. So I wrote a poem called Careen Among the Fronds of Basil because she said the frost was coming. I think we might be near a frost tonight. I'm not sure. So I'm not going to read that poem because it, well, I don't have time to read two poems. I'll read one poem, which is, it's called Ekphrasis. But it has to do with this poem about Careen and the fronds of basil. Ekphrasis. I took a photograph of Careen as soon as she came in. I like photographs of Careen. She's a very shapely young woman, 40 years younger than me. And, you know, if you stare too long, she calls it ogling and files a report. But if you just say, stand there with the basil and take your time, you can get a lot of looking in. Ekphrasis. I took this photo of Careen last year and wrote a poem later the same day, which was the day she saved the basil in my garden from the frost she heard was nigh. Her standing in my kitchen holding those greens, the aspects of her, that look of longing, put me in mind of William Holman Hunt's old painting of John Keats's poem, Isabella, or the Pot of Basil, inside of which, the pot, not incidentally, the head of Lorenzo, her murdered lover, is decomposing and hidden from view. So we keep ogling Isabella, her languor and pining, her ample bosom, who has the face of Hunt's departed wife, who died in childbirth some months before he finished this canvas. It's an old story, refashioned by Keats from Boccaccio, the way all poets borrow, great ones steal, according to T.S. Eliot, that thief. Or was it Picasso? God only knows. The way one image leads to another, the snapshot, the sudden spark, the seeing that brings something separate into being, the seedling becoming something the seed could never itself have quite imagined, connecting the bits of one creation to bits and pieces of another, the rooting, ramifying urgency that pushes the new thing into the light. The poem that I made that day became one of many in a book of poems called Bone Rosary, a collection of beads by which we keep track of being and ceasing to be, those living mysteries in light of which all we do is sit in silence. My daughter used to call me El Jefe when she was working at the funeral home. Before that saddened panic rose in her, they diagnosed as schizophrenia. It kept her estranged from us for 15 years before she took her leap from off the bridge in Marin County, California. The Golden Gate became her sad line's end. My friend Joan painted a portrait of her. I hung it on the bedroom wall upstairs. We gather what we can of brokenness into a place where we might reframe it as restoration or a sort of wholeness in the horrid face of desolation. There's more to this, of course, but mystery wants more than anything, alas, our silence. So, back to the photo and the poem. Ekphrasis with a side of illusion, the senses and the imagination free-ranging in the way they take their cues from one life's long-named Tallulah Flores, which I Englished as Tallulah Flowers, a plural noun or verb, it's hard to know. She asked, would I read some of my poems for their festival, Poemario, featuring poets of the Caribbean? Except for stays in the Lesser Antilles, Cancun and Casa de Campo once, I couldn't figure out why she asked me, but chose some poems to do with flowers, with gardening and growing things, with all Montbretia and rhododendrons, or So Corinne among the fronds of basil became Corinne entre las hojas de la Oaxaca. And when a visiting theologian spoke the Spanish version of the poem, for she in fact had worked the Caribbean in service of her church, the Anglicans, all the versions of it seemed connected. The mysteries of love and death and silence, the sound, the sense, the sight of timely harvest, the women in my kitchen and my poems, the beauty of their being and their gifts whereby the broken heart is nonetheless still beating out its possibilities. A moment of balm, a tonic possibly, a romance involving flowers, their meanings, trees of knowledge of good and evil, Romeo and Juliet, Flores and Blanchefleur, Adam and Eve. I'm living in a Leonard Cohen tune, involving a woman and a river, a distant country and the theater, something on canvas, cast in bronze or song, by which mammals discern the way of other mammals. Let us grant that it involves an island, a bridge, a ferry, a water crossing, an open grave, an empty sky, the sun, the moon, the loving body, and ourselves alone. Sometimes the pool of sorrows overflows. Sometimes the shit that happens overwhelms. And still the unanticipated beyond imagination. There it is. The moonlight in the bedroom window gives a glimpse of her, naked and unabashed, and curling into your embrace with ease, as if she came to reckon with your pain, the long years of damage and estrangement, the thankless, luckless, sorry circumstance of being you, yourself, in the sore world. And these are surplus to requirements, her willing body adjacent to yours, and her pressing herself onto yourself. An abundance much like grace itself is unearned and undeserved, much the same as creation's favor with its creatures. The fervor of lovers for love-making, the reverence for beauty and for being, the texture of longing touch exposes, or liberties taken in mostly smallish doses, a sudden catch of the breath, a sudden seeing, or the way that Isabella's weeping never brought Lorenzo back, but greened the basil, and beckoned the poets and the painters to make something out of such contingencies, the way Corinne could sense the coming frost, a hankering for pasta and pesto sauce, the common table shared, the table talk with fellow palmers or with passers-by, by which we get a sense of the connections, a sense withal that we are not alone in our heartaches, longings, and bereavements, our losses, lack of lucks, the brief achievements we might be, with any luck, remembered for. So, when I got tired of writing long poems, I thought the only thing that I wanted to write and hadn't done yet was to write a novel. And I should tell you that my father was a combat Marine in World War II. And he came home, thanks be, and fell into making babies with my mother. They made several of them. They made 9 of them. The old joke was, Rosemary, you must really like children. And she said, I like Eddie Lynch, and left it at that, speaking, I think, for the generation of women who grew up Catholic at the time. But anyway, so I wanted to tell my father's story because back in I think it was March of 91, I had the duty and honor of burying a young Marine who was killed in the first misadventure George Bush had in Iraq and in Kuwait. And this young man had married one of the Finnish girls from up here, but who had settled in the Wixom area downstate. And we handled most of all of their funerals through the Lutheran Church. And very often we would be required to bring them back up north for burial, which is how I became familiar with the Upper Peninsula. I always wondered, and I think maybe if somebody knows the answer to this, They always call you Youpers, and I always thought you should be called Uppers, because there's something very good about the citizenry up here in a way that below the straits we don't seem to feel as glad to be alive and as grateful for being as you do. Anyway, after burying this young Marine with my father's help, we went to lunch, and he had been recently widowed, and he was, I guess he was in his mid-60s at the time. He was 65. And my sister, who joined us for lunch and had helped us on the funeral, asked him what his experience in the Marine Corps had been like after we buried this young Marine. Tormanen was the boy's name. He was 22. He didn't ever meet the son that his wife was carrying at the time of his death. His bunker had collapsed on him between Kuwait and Iraq, and that's how he died. And my father said that until the night my mother died, the worst night of his life had been in January of 1944, when he and elements of the 1st Marines survived 5 banzai charges by Japanese foot soldiers. And he was grateful for the fact that he kept shooting into the darkness all night, aiming at voices. But he was shaken by the sight of the bodies laid out in front of him in the morning as the sun came up, and more shaken still when his commanding officer instructed them to go dispatch all the wounded Japanese, because he said they will never surrender. Kill them now. And for my father, who was, sort of an Orthodox Catholic boy, I think that was a trauma. I think that was a moral trespass for him. But he did it. And I think that had a lot to do with the man he became in later days. And so I wanted to write about that, and I write it in the character of Doyle Shields, who's the character who this book's about. I'll read you just a couple paragraphs. This is from a chapter called Moorings. Most of us are putting boats away this time of year. The older he got, the harder it was to put the boat away. Harder still to get the old dog Bill into the boat. Bill the Bernese was not fond of water or moving vessels. More than anything, it declared the year inexorably bending towards its dark denouement. The subtraction of light seemed a cruelty. Taking the old Chris Craft, it seemed like surrender. Especially if the day was fine, he found it difficult. All the more so if the extended forecast did not foreclose the possibility of reprieves, however fleeting. The odd day of mild weather, higher temps, a little sun. At 66, he would tell himself, there was still some time for him, just as there was still some warmth in October, even November. Indian summer, he told himself, and looked at the gold in the trees and thought how glorious they would look in the autumnal light. Surely he could wait for it out, though Jamesy from the marina had already called to see if Doyle didn't think it time to bring it in, and he'd be happy to send Sheila over to bring the old Chris Craft up the river if it was too miserable, what with the chill and the threat of rain for a man Doyle's age to make the journey. Ever since Sally had died, ever since Sally had died, it's terrible when you can't turn the pages. Nearly a year ago now, folks treated Doyle like a hobbled man, which in many ways, of course, he was. The boat was old, Doyle was older still, both of them still in serviceable, if sometimes shaky, working order. It wasn't so much of a journey, Doyle would always tell Jamesy, and he'd be bringing the boat back to its winter storage longer than Jamesy had been on the planet, and he'd be bringing it back this year in his own good time, thank you. I'll have it there before the freeze. I always do, he insisted, and thank you for checking. One year, all the talk was about, and I'll stop that there. I want to read one other section because it belongs to this area. He remembered the morning years ago he first saw this part of Michigan. He was taking a body up to the UP for burial for Noah Potty, who did all the Finnish and Swedish funerals in Detroit. Noah wasn't a regular account. Doyle Shields, by the way, is a trade embalmer. He doesn't have a funeral home, but he's a really good embalmer, and that's how he makes his living, going from funeral home to funeral home to funeral home. Noah wasn't a regular account, but called on Doyle whenever he had a bad case, a withering cancer or car accident, anything that required more restorative art than the tidy old Lutherans who died in their sleep that Noah happily embalmed himself. This kid was the worst case that Noah had seen, he told Doyle when he called. Split his damn face down the middle with a .30-06, the poor bastard, over a girl of all things. But his people insist on seeing him. He'd done it out at the Finnish camp on Loon Lake in Wixom and lay in that June heat for a couple of days before anyone thought to check on him. He'd been drinking and threatening his fellow campers for days before laying himself out on the bed, taking the gun barrel into his mouth and pulling the trigger with his toe. Then a couple of days in this heat and humidity, no sign of maggots yet, but there's plenty of flies, Noah told him. I've got some kerosene. It was 1957, Doyle remembered, because it was the first new car he ever had, the 1957 Plymouth station wagon that he had bought with money he borrowed from his mother-in-law. His first dead wagon. Perfect for the paterfamilias and jobber, it diversified his offerings, adding removals and road trips to his trade embalming. Plus, he could put Sally and the kids in it for family outings and Sunday masses. He'd march them into St. Columban's like boot camp in order of age and rank, preteen and toddling versions of young Marines. Connor the first and tallest, then Fiona, then Finbar, and Liam the youngest. Multitasking, they call it now, he thought, this two birds with one stone approach, how the car was good for business and family. In a pinch, he could haul units for Batesville on weekends from their warehouse in Southfield all over town. Shields Specialty Services, he called the enterprise, and titled out the Plymouth to Sally's name because the insurance was less. He had some pamphlets printed up and passed them out among his regular accounts and mailed out some others to funeral homes in the metro area. He ran an ad in the trade journal published by the state association and had some first call sheets made up with his 24-hour phone number on it. When you require the best, call SSS, was the slogan that appeared at the bottom in italics. It came to him doing a double post one night for Al Desmond in the Highland Park office. In the fullness of time, he'd hired young embalmers straight out of mortuary school, the best and the brightest, he called them, guys like himself who wanted no part of dealing with widows and orphans and the newly bereaved, nor had they the connections to finance nor ambition to start up their own funeral homes. They didn't want to be indentured to brick and mortar. They traveled light with their embalming kits and were glad to pay Doyle his 15% for keeping them working all over town. They knew how to tend to the dead and a moment's notice, and all the hours, and preferred the stillness of the prep room and the corpse to the glad handing and mindless blather required upstairs at the front door, or the back office, or the bank, or the rotary. Doyle was a trade embalmer and jobber. He could repair most damage done to a body, but had no appetite or patience for the care of the living. He was a front-line guy, but he wanted nothing to do with being in charge. His name on a pad of first call sheets was okay, but he did not want to be the boss or have his name on a sign. He could get a body out of the county morgue, prepped and dressed and laid out before evening calling hours, but he didn't want to upsell caskets or burial vaults or urns. He didn't want to worry over payroll or vacation schedules or cash flow or property tax. He didn't want the bankers or lawyers or sales reps or headaches that came with a brick-and-mortar enterprise. He wanted to show up, pitch in, do his part, and get paid and on his way. For funeral directors, reputation was everything. Their standing in the community, the generations of compassionate care. For Doyle Shields, there was none of that. He didn't have to deal with the living. And the dead, he was fond of telling Sally, don't care. The worst that can happen has already happened. Whatever Doyle Shields did was more good than harm. There was no complaints or unreasonable demands. It goes on from there. I thought there was much more about, he's on a trip to Copper Harbor when all this happens to take a body up there for burial, which is something that's how I first found the UP, though both my mother's parents were from the UP, one from my grandmother from Munising and my grandfather from Manistee. So it's so nice to be back up here. I think maybe we should take maybe John and I are going to chat about this for a little bit, and then why don't you come up here, John, and we'll pretend we know what we're doing, and you can do the leap, yeah. All right.
Whoa.
I'm going to sit on the left.
It used to be I could just do that without
Here you go.
breaking union rules if I move this.
No.
Okay.
I'm part of the union, so
Okay.
no.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Well, let's. If I don't have it there, I'll swing it around like Mick Jagger.
Okay.
Okay, hear me all right? Well, Tom, here we are again. Years ago, I mean, we're talking at least 25 years ago, Tom came here in this very room, I think before there was a stage. Am I correct? There wasn't always a stage here. It was just like a big room. And he gave a reading, and I had invited him up because I met him, I don't know which town it was down in the Detroit area, but I gave a reading with M.L. Lieberler, who is a poet and writer connected with Wayne State, and Tom, and it was a packed room. They weren't there because of me. They were there because of these two fellas. I had just had a book out, and I was honored to be down there. And then maybe within a year or so later, I was teaching in one of my undergraduate classes his book, his collection of essays, and my students were petrified when I told them that Tom was going to come and visit class. I mean, this was a man who had a huge vocabulary, and he was a mortician. I mean, 18 to 20-year-olds are not really going to be thrilled about that. And so Tom shows up in a black suit, and that set the tone. Within 2 or 3 minutes, we sat in a big circle. Tom sat down in his black suit, and he started talking to these kids. And within 2 or 3 minutes, he broke the ice with them, and they started to talk about their own experience with mortality. Dead grandparents, friends, members of family. And it was just a remarkable transformation, because I really thought at first these kids are going to just button up and not go anywhere. Now, Tom, I wrote down a bunch of questions, but I'm only going to ask one. Well, let me see what I said here. Do you see writing as a religious experience? This is a fastball question for you.
No.
You
No,
don't?
I just see it as I think the Irish have a better sense of writers, My cousin Nora used to always wonder what I was doing when I was writing or typing in her little house on the west coast of Clare, until one day I was invited in connection with an event much like this
Yeah.
to go to Limerick and have and give a reading in the early evening. And I asked Nora, would she like to ride along with me, because she hadn't been to Limerick in like 30 years. It was a couple hours away. And when we got there, they said they wanted to interview me for the local newspaper, and during that time, they had someone who took Nora to dinner and had her fed and didn't charge her anything. And she thought, this is real work. This is an honorable day job, just like plumbing or electricity or farming. That you can do. This is gainful labor, because you're doing something that people will feed you for. And I think the Irish have always regarded their writers, and they have they have the standing army of great writers has never fallen below about 5,000 in my lifetime, anyway. And they have many Nobel laureates, and they're people who know the language very well. And because of that, they regard writing as an honorable day job, and I kind of like that. I always sort of winced when people would say, oh, I always thought when they'd say he's a really fine writer and he's an undertaker, I think what they were saying was they were amazed that a funeral director could string sentences together. And I always hated that idea that he's really a good writer for an undertaker. And I thought, I want to be a really good writer, full stop. And that's why, though I've retired from funeral service some years ago, I continue to write because it's not a religious experience, it's just the only thing I know how to do. I type, and some days it rises to the occasion, and I say, well, that's real writing. Mm-hmm. Other days it's mostly typing, I can tell you that, so, yeah.
Well, you sort of segued into another question that I jotted while I was reading the book. Is being a mortician the perfect occupation for a poet or a writer, or is it not?
Well, any day job that keeps body and soul together is a great, because writers
True.
You know, they need to eat, and they want to have families, and they want to, go out with intimate partners, and they want to have a life outside of their imagination, and that costs money, as most of us have found. So, a day job is a good thing, and then time enough to walk around doing nothing of importance, which is when writers do their most work, because they're living that internal life that all of us have. And but the writers write it down and share it with others. And others think nobody has ever experienced this before. We are the same species. We've been experiencing the same things, through most of history, So this book is kind of based on, I was telling John earlier today, I saw Moby Dick in 1956, the movie my father took me to, was Gregory Peck, Captain Ahab.
Yeah.
And I remember as soon as I got back from that movie, I was 7 or 8 years old, I said, what I want for Christmas is a book called Moby Dick, and they got it for me. And I read it, and I read it again in high school, I read it again in college, I read it again every chance I get. And so this book begins with, call me Doyle Shields. Because I figured it worked for Melville. And it ends with with a whirlpool. But the whirlpool's in a shower, and Doyle Shields has just gotten a blowjob. And he dies of the blowjob that we all hope, and his friends say, what a way to go. It's... The poem I wrote about my father's war experience, called No Prisoners, was about his romance and how it pretty much killed him, And but he used to say you have to have something worth dying for. And I thought, well, that's true. We must risk everything in love and in death. So. Sex and the Dead, Yeats wrote, and this is why I write about it, are the only scholarly the only subjects that should be of interest to the scholarly mind are sex and the dead. And I thought, how nice for me, because corpses are everywhere in my life, and I like sex, so it worked out well. I'm telling you the truth. You know this is true. Yeah. We all think about when it's going to happen to me.
How about if I ask if there's someone who wants to ask a question? I have something I want to sort of conclude with, but right here.
Hi, thanks for coming today. My wife and I are coming back from Mackinac City Saturday. We put my brother's ashes in Lake Huron. And I was thinking about your writing and the undertaking that you went to Florida, I believe, to take care of your dad.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how hard that was or not?
Well, when my father died, and he died as Doyle Shields does, in the shower. And he died in the company of his intimate partner. He had been widowed, just like Doyle Shields. But he became the object of pursuit among the single set of widows and divorcees. And this is true for men and women who are alone at the end of their life. Somebody will find you. But anyway, he went to Florida, and he died after a day with his partner collecting seashells on the beach on Boca Grande. And she called and said, "Your father's gone." And my brother said, "Where'd he go?" "Oh, he's dead." Well, we had been expecting this call for a while. He'd had a heart attack every 6 months since his wife had died, and he survived 2 out of 3 of them. So I can just hear him saying, "That's not bad," But anyway, he was dead as a mackerel, and I called the funeral director in Fort Myers, the Anderson Funeral Home, and I said, "Could you wait, and we'll come down and prepare our father to bring him home. We'll do the embalming." And people would say to me, that it's so very hard. And it was not. I mean, the hard part was that our father was dead. And this is something that was an answer to his prayers, I'm sure, because he had always prayed not to outlive any of his children, and his prayer was answered. But, and he was lonesome. And he believed in a heaven in which he would see his spouse again. So, but going there with my brother and preparing his body and bringing it back, it felt, on the one hand, it was very hard. On the other hand, I was so glad to be part of it. And I imagine when you got your brother's ashes where they needed to be, where they needed to go, you got where you needed to be with the whole notion of being without your brother. So I commend you for the courage it takes to rise to that occasion, and I envy the comfort you no doubt got from it. And because that's the comfort we're all after. And it allows me to say, as much of this that you can do yourself. Undertakers are around to sort of encourage you to do as much of it as you can, whether it's lifting or bearing or standing vigil for the day or the night or the 2 days or 2 nights, or digging the grave or throwing a shovel full in it, or going to the fire if you're going to burn the dead. And this is the part that makes me think as a culture we've missed the point, because almost everybody in this room has probably been present for the burial of the dead and has participated in a body going into the ground and helped, even symbolically cover the grave. But more people are burned in this culture. 2/3 of our dead are burned in this state, and yet less than 15% go to 15% of their survivors take the opportunity to go to the crematory and witness the placing of the body in the retort. We love the efficiency of cremation and the economy of cremation, but we miss the meaning of it and the powerful imagery of cleaning, and the light and the warmth and the elemental goodness that fire is, in the same way that ground is. So go the distance with your dead. Go where you have to go. You'll get where you need to be. So, yeah.
Someone else? Another question? No? Okay. Well then,
Wait a second.
I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
I read in the article that you were somewhere around Mount Lake.
I am at the south end.
Well, my question, sir, is I spent a number of years in that area, Sheboygan, and Indian River, and you had mentioned that you're Catholic.
Devoutly lapsed.
Well, my question is, in that
The shrine, yeah.
or down by Camp Rondo going to Wolverine.
Hmm.
Did any of that area influence you on any of your writing?
Well, I had nuns and Christian brothers all through my upbringing. My parents were my mother was a rabid, devout Catholic. And and I consider the Catholic education I got a gift. I think religious literacy is essential to understand the way things are. When I say I'm devoutly lapsed, I'm currently, I guess you'd say, consorting with an Anglican woman, the daughter of a priest. I like saying that. I really like saying that, and but sometimes she can seem almost nunnish in her goodness. I mean, she's a good soul. You can see that about her. So when she comes to visit, I go to church with her. I say I'm Anglican adjacent, so I take her to the Episcopal Church, which in that town, as you probably remember, is called Transfiguration, which is what I'm after. I want to be transfigured. And so to be Anglican adjacent or devoutly lapsed as a Catholic is to me a station in life much better than never to have heard about these mysteries. I think we really do need mystery. And as Doyle Shields comes to understand, mystery wants our silence. When my daughter leapt to her death in 2020, I got many, many condolences, as one does. And they were all, I was grateful for all of them. But none was so perfectly tuned to where I was spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, and every other way, as one that came from Tom Long, with whom I've written a book called The Good Funeral, oddly enough. He's a Presbyterian clergyman, but he's taught for years. He's a homilist. And all he wrote was, I'm so sorry that the times we live in, we were in the middle of COVID and the lockdown. I'm so sorry that the times we live in prevent me from rushing to your side and sitting on that porch of yours and staring into the mystery in silence with you. I don't know exactly what that means, but it still means a lot to me.
Beverly?
When did you know you were a writer?
Well, I didn't do well with the piano, and I had to give up drink for the usual reasons. You can figure that out. And chicks dig it. And I thought, well, this will make me popular with girls. It didn't. Although I must say that the woman I'm consorting with now read all my books before she called me. She didn't call me. She went to my website, which is, this is the thing to be wished for, But she's an Anglican, so you can expect that of her, And then she came to see me. So, but I knew I was a writer because, oddly enough, my grandmother from Munising, who married a man from Seney when they met downstate in Ann Arbor, she was studying music and he played the clarinet. And he fell in love, I believe, with her ankles because all the pictures of her show her dressed from head to toe. So the only thing he could admire about her were her ankles. And but she used to say to me, slow down, enunciate and articulate. Don't swallow your words. They're more valuable than that. And so whenever I'd write to her, and she kept up a correspondence with me. My first writing was in correspondence. She said, you can do this. You can do this. And just keep writing. So I just kept writing. Yeah. Grandmothers are one of the best things there are, I think, because, well, they are. They know us before we know ourselves.
One more question, or should I? Dana?
I just wonder if the process for writing a novel is different than writing poetry or essays.
How much time have we got?
Yeah, well, yeah. John has probably told you the answer. It's different, yes. But it took me 15 years to do this. I'll never do that again. But I'd like to dip my toe in another character who's sort of occupying my imagination lately. And her name is Delphine, named after her father's delphinium, not remarkably. She's bisexual. She's attracted to the reverend clergy of both genders. And she's got a great life going so far, at least in my mind. And so that may come into, but I think I would never spend more than a year and a half again on a book of at least a fiction. But it might take me 14 years of wandering around thinking about it, so who knows?
That's all work. Bev, yeah?
So when you were writing the book, did you have any idea how it would end?
No, I knew that Doyle was going to be dead at the end. He was dead in the first chapter. He was dead at the beginning. It begins with two women, his paramour and an assistant at graveside. They know him better than anybody else, and they're discussing what they've learned from him over the years. And so those two characters are part of, and I knew that he'd be dead at the end because the book only goes from his burial to his death. Everything else in the middle is sort of incidental. Yeah.
No, because I know some novelists have it all plotted out, what's going to happen in the first chapter, the next, and they follow that, that outline they have for themselves.
I've always had to, my work in prose has always been essaying, and I always knew that essaying was sort of just setting yourself afloat and seeing, hoping that the language would get you across the river or to the other side. And sometimes it doesn't. Lots of times it doesn't. And furthermore, if you don't leave enough footing for your readers, they'll get bored and put the book down and never pick it up again. So for me, writing is sort of an adventure that you begin full of hope and expectation, but you don't know the outcome. And but I really did. I had set myself the goal of finishing a novel. So after 15 years, I thought it's time now, and I think it got finished finally in the last, couple weeks. And then it had to be revised for the publisher and the rest of it, and we had a lot of adventures with that. But I would say, if you're writing every day, something will come of it. Yeah.
Ann?
Well, that just raised your question, was the editing process. How did the editing process for this compare with having an editor for your essays?
Well, I'm an internationally unknown poet, and a meagerly awarded essayist. But I will brook no editing on essays or poems anymore. They are what they are. But I had never done this before, so when Celia Johnson took over the editing of this from the man who had acquired the book, and then went off to publish Joan Baez, to whom he was introduced by me. Joan, I think, pays me back with in the hardbound copies of the book. Which, have you some for sale tonight? Yeah. That's good. Joan writes a nice blurb on it, and I think she's trying to say thanks, Tom, for not making a big. But anyway, when Celia Johnson took it over, she's a serious editor at David R. Godine, and I had my former editor had been Gordon Lish at Alfred Knopf, and then Joe Bialowski at W.W. Norton. So I had been through a couple editors before this one. Celia was the toughest, but the best. She has great instincts, great instincts. I kept all the correspondence thinking that I'd probably, put a jihad on her, but now I just think I want to get her a Nobel Prize for something because she really helped me.
Okay, well, we want to make sure we have some time so Tom can sign books, if you would like.
All the people who you have on your Christmas list who seem to have everything, they don't have this.
They don't, that's right, that's right.
Just saying.
Buy your Christmas presents tonight, buy early.
If you give them booze, it makes them think you think they drink. But if you give them a book, it makes them think you think they read. Probably they drink more than they read, but either way, a book is a good gift. So, and John has several for sale. So,
Not here, not tonight.
thanks for your curiosities.
25 years ago, in October of 2000, Tom was here. I have a document here that proves this, okay? And he gave a reading here, and this is the time when he came to Northern and visited one of my classes and relieved my students of their concerns and their absolute fear. He stayed with us, with my first wife and I, when we lived over on Pine Street. And the morning that he left, he gave us this piece of paper, which has been I've got all of his books at home. And when I was looking through them, maybe a couple of months ago, this fell out. So we've had this. Tom hasn't seen this. He doesn't know about this. But he wrote this at our house and gave it to us, I think, at breakfast before heading back down across the bridge. So, Tom, once you read this, it might remind you of some of the moment.
This was a birthday poem. I always wanted to write a sonnet every year on my birthday. I wrote this and thought it was brilliant, of course. And then I counted the lines. There were 15 lines. One off. So, which means the older we get, the less we count. This is true. But the title, which fixed everything, is called Refusing at 52 to Write Sonnets. And my handwriting was very nice. Yeah. It came to him that he could nearly count how many Octobers he had left to him in increments of 10 or say 11, thus 63, 74, 85. He couldn't see himself at 96. Humanity's advances notwithstanding in healthcare, self-help, or New Age regimens. What with his habits and family history, the end, he thought, is nearer than you think. The future thus confined to its contingencies. The present moment opens like a gift. The balding month, the dull week, the gray morning, the hour's routine, the minutes' passing glance, all seem like godsends now. And what to make of this? In the end, the word that comes to him is thanks. Thanks.
I'll frame it.
Me too.
Thank you all. There'll be books available at the back, and Tom would love to sign them and say hello to you. So thanks for coming. All right. Yeah. Oh, thanks. This is very nice. Is this new?
This is just something that I had done up just to put these two poems together mostly.